Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Katherine Horton, and today is the 11th of July 2019. Before I start, let me do my usual sound check. Hello and welcome. Okay, that sounds good. So I'm sorry about the delay. At the moment, things are extremely difficult. I am suffering from, well, extreme amounts of torture, really. I will tell you why. There has been brutal retaliation. And this whiteboard here behind me, I usually use it as shielding because it has solid metal on the back. So this one is, I usually shift it in front of my bed, believe it or not. I'm using a big whiteboard as shielding. And yesterday I went and I did a police report at Canton Aargau. That's where I live. I live in Canton Aargau, and I reported the attacks on me. I reported the microwaving on the Swiss streets, the one that branded the disc into my forehead. I reported harassment mail, and I also submitted the genocide plans and also other harassment that I suffered. So I have handed in the genocide plans to the police, and with this, and I told them these are crimes against humanity, they do have to act. If they do not, they will be held legally liable and Nuremberg style. So anyway, this incurred brutal retaliation, and today I can visually show you just how brutal this retaliation was, because last night I was literally, many of you know, I sleep under shielding, well, what I would call almost military grade shielding. I've got about 15 or 20 layers of sheet metal above my head that I also have to shield all around. And at one side of the bed, which I actually, swapped around. So I was, my head was just behind this whiteboard last night. And the shots were so violent that I could hear the shots banging, not just against the metal that I had immediately around me, but also against the entire whiteboard. And it knocked, so they wait until I'm about to fall asleep. They measure my chip implants on my scalp, and they try to wake me with just noise. And then after the noise comes a big shot into the skull. So if you're wondering why they do it that way, why first noise announcement and then shot in the skull, why not just shoot me in the skull? Well, that has to do with, first of all, the psychology of psychopathic serial killers. They like to announce it, they like to scare you. And it also has got to do with conditioning. So they try to build up, some sort of dramatic scaredness so that you'll become scared on cue, and they hope that then they don't really have to shoot you in the head all the time. They can sometimes shoot you in the head and not always. So you've got all this kind of serial killer games. But anyway, I now I realized I can today show you visual proof of this, because I realized that these guys have shot the whiteboard so hard that they dented the whiteboard. And you can, I will show you, I hope, hang on, I have to gauge it where my finger is. Let me just shift this whiteboard here. Okay, so I checked that I can show you before. All right, can you see this? There's 1, 2, 3 shots. Now, these dents, okay, I have seen these before on the other side of this whiteboard. This whiteboard used to hang in my office in Langacher Straße in Canton Zurich. And there was one section which was full of these in one straight line. But there's about 20 of these very tightly next to each other. And when I only noticed this when I took the whiteboard down. It was brand new when I bought it. I hung it up on the wall. It was pristine. And by the time I'm moving out, the back is dented. And the dents were on the other side going inward. And they aligned perfectly with the neighbor. Those of you who follow me will know that there was a neighbor who had put up a screen on his balcony, a huge screen that I discovered by looking on Google Maps. And the screen is shielding, and there was a little outdoor, kind of like a garden house on his balcony where I suspected he placed his weapons, because the weapons were perfectly aligned with my study. And then it was a slight angle, so the back reflection would have hit the flat, but that's exactly where the screen was. So the hut my wall and what looked like massive, really solid shielding were perfectly lined up. And it turns out these lines of, equidistant dents of this type, very, very dense together, line up with that balcony. Then come the dents, and then comes my head at the desk. It was one perfect straight line. So I already knew that these sort of dents are evidence for directed energy weapon gunning of a certain type that can dent sheet metal. And here it is again. So here, you can see the ferocity of, I don't know if this is the NATO Space Command or the Swiss military that fired the shots last night, but that's what it looks like. And the same waveform that can dent sheet metal can also cause, of course, brain bleeding and brain damage. So my former colleague, Karen Melton-Stewart, she already reported that she had brain bleeding from NSA and NSA security stalking her and maiming her. And this is why, okay? This is why. This is what it looks like. So if I actually took a nail, I would have to hit that nail with a hammer quite hard to create something like that. So the amount of, energy in these shots is amazing. And what can then solid metal, this is what causing these knocks on my skull, guys. Okay, so when I'm tweeting out that I received a knock on my skull and a huge flash through my nervous system, it's because I was shot in the head by one of these. Okay, so that's exactly what happened last night. And it went on for hours and hours and hours. And these are just the 3 shots that happened to hit the shielding. Okay, there's other angles that I can be targeted at, where unfortunately there wasn't any shielding last night, as I discovered. So this is what happened, and now let me tell you why I incurred the ire of the Swiss Nazi serial killers, otherwise known as the Swiss military and the Swiss Secret Service, and it's because I submitted this police report. But what I've also been doing the last couple of days is that every single night, they, gun me awake or they torture me. I just send a cease and desist to all of them, to the NATO Space Command, to the Swiss military leadership, the chief of whatever, the chief of staff, the chief of clowns, the Secret Service in Switzerland. And I CC in all the 250 parliamentarians in Switzerland. And I have done this systematically now for a couple of days. And every single time I send one of these notices, I also do an information dump on the parliament. And I would like to point you to my website where you can find these cease and desists for 2 reasons. Number 1, you can imitate them. Number 2, you can also download it as evidence. If you're in Switzerland, you can directly use it and put it straight into your court bundle. But if you're not in Switzerland, you can also put it in your court bundle and quote that stuff like this is happening in Switzerland, and this is what people are doing, to counter it. Okay, so let me share my screen. Sorry, here we go. So if you go to my website, stop007.org, you will find something called the Holocaust Diary, and I am trying to keep it up to date. I don't always manage, but up here you can find now the cease and desist. This is the one I sent to all of them last night, so you can find it here. And so this is the NATO Space Command, the Swiss military. These 2 are the NDB, so the Nachrichtendienst des Bundes. And then this is also another, military link. And then you see all the parliamentarians here. And at the very end, I included actually a German parliamentarian here called Sebastian Brehm, because Sebastian Brehm from the Bundestag was the parliamentarian who was in charge of torture, believe it or not. And he replied to me and he confirmed, or rather his PA confirmed, that he will be raising the issue of torture at the next opportunity. So I'm including him here, but here you can also read, it's in English, so I just, do a dump on them in English. And at the very end, so you can also see all the other emails I've sent. So this is from the 11th of July. I sent one on the 9th of July. You can read that. The 8th of July, the 7th of July, and the 5th of July. And every single time I include something. So here I included the Internet of Things in our body. These are the plans and the scientific paper that goes with it. You can find this in the research library on my website. If you want to see the other attachments, you actually have to scroll down and open the corresponding files. Here, for example, on the 9th, the stuff I included, which you can always find at the end, are photographs of what my body looks like when I'm being shot at. So some of these bruises are, 2 or 3 days old, but you get the idea. So I basically wake up with these bruises. And this is from the gunning of the, from satellite weapons. And the size of the bruise matches up with the dent on my whiteboard that you've just seen. So these are pencil beams, or rather very fine shots. It's pretty much the size of a bullet. It's just that this is not a bullet. This is a pulsed energy projectile. So whatever dents my whiteboard is also ripping through my tissue and is basically bursting blood vessels, resulting in bruising. So this is now on my lower arm. Here you can see it on my hip. That was a big one. And you can also see different beam sizes. So this is a pencil beam. This is slightly larger. I think the beam was roughly the size of a 5 Swiss franc coin, so a very large coin. Then you can see a very large beam. This is my left leg, which was utterly bruised up. And there, when you look at the image, you can see a big beam size and then a cluster of small pencil beams that are even thinner than this one here. And you can just see how at night, when I'm lying on my side, I'm just utterly gunned to bits. And here you can also see my legs massively swollen because I'm basically being gunned every single day. So I am sending them information. Here, I think the posting on the 8th of July, just so that you know what the Swiss have, was evidence of the how my forehead has permanently been branded, and you can see the beam size just by measuring the radius of the circle, this disc. And I sent them the Deal and Rheinmetall advert for the directed energy weapons that are gunning me on the street, and so on. So you can see that I'm making a good effort to inform the Swiss Parliament and all these people. And the one thing that goes out of the window with this is plausible deniability. Okay, so that is game over, basically. And today's episode is the next phase of this war. And the next phase is to take all of these people to court. Okay, what you need to know is that every single person who has been notified by me, in here you can see their first and surname in the email as far as the parliamentarians are concerned, and they all have a legal liability now. So they have a statutory duty to act in the case of crimes against humanity and in the case of weapons of mass destruction being used on the civilian population. So should they fail to act, they all individually and collectively have a legal liability now. And this legal liability, I think, will surprise them how big it actually is. Okay, then what else you can find on this page is the harassment posts that I keep getting. So I photographed, the sort of shit that I'm getting here. You can scroll down and see other postings. Here, for example, that was a harassment postcard that I scanned in, so you can see the bullshit that I'm getting. Here, this particular one was, this is the type of postcard I'm getting, and you can read the text on the back with cartel signaling, replacing the letter U with the letter I, so, twice here in this case. This was a postcard that was sent to me via mypostcard.com, which means that there's an IP address associated with this, so we can find out who exactly sent me this. And it's all kind of mockery of my what I'm putting out online. The number of days that I'm being tortured and so on. The other thing that I received on the 28th of June is a fraudulent order for microwave. Okay, so here you can see Mikrowelle here for over 100 Swiss francs that was sent to my old address. And this old address is what I've published. I've made this public. I don't live at that address anymore, so you guys can save yourself sending me posts there. I only accept postage now through email. But here, somebody actually made this order, and the microwave was sent to my old address. So the kind of harassment or threat associated with that is clear. But I've just called the company, and they confirmed that this order was made over online. So again, we have an IP address. So the NSA knows exactly, and GCHQ know exactly who made this order and who harassed me with this sort of stuff. So anyway, now I've handed all this in at the police, so that is under development. And yeah, so this is one thing. Now, what I also want to show you is other type of progress, which is here. You will find it under interviews, press, and media. And you will find it here under press release number 1 down here. So this is the press release that was sent on the 5th of June 2019, first time. And it's the general information about crimes against humanity. Okay, so the subject line reads notice. Here you can see a sample email here with the subject crimes against humanity press release number 1. So crimes against humanity is the key word. As soon as you notify people of that, if they are police force or government in Europe, for historical reasons, they need to act. And what I've informed them about is the results of the JIT survey, just based on the first 15 affidavits. And I've sent them these analysis results and what type of assaults are typical. Okay, so this is the type of analysis, and saying that in 93% of the cases, they're stalking, that in 93% of the cases, it's also for life, targeting is for life, regardless when it started, and so on. So with this, all the people who were informed of this, okay, now cannot come back at you and say, oh, we didn't know about it, or oh, you're just making it up, because they have just been sent evidence of this. And I sent these emails throughout June. And what I would like to show you is here, the last entry, the 5th of July. This is the document where I'm showing you who was contacted. Okay, this is the big summary. Now, I've contacted so many people, I had to make a matrix, okay? So now I'm just, every single X stands for lists that sometimes comprise 600 people, okay? But this is now the overview. At the top, you can see what type of agency or institution was contacted, and vertically here, you can see for which country, okay? So starting with Canada, I've contacted the mainstream press and the entire parliament in Canada. Okay, so if I just look under parliamentarians, you can see that an entirety of 6 parliaments have now been contacted, namely for Canada, for Denmark, for Sweden, for Switzerland, the United Kingdom, whereby for the UK, I've contacted the entirety of the House of Commons and the entire House of Lords, thanks to a gentleman who sent me the email list. I'm very grateful for that. And also Australia. And I also would like to thank the lady who sent me the list for Canada, the entire parliament. So assembling these lists takes absolutely hours. But once we have them, we can just keep sending them press releases. So it makes it very efficient. I have to say it is astoundingly hard contacting the US senators and the US members of Congress. And I guess it's because they are, over 320 million people in the US. So, they want to make it as impossible as they can so that they don't get spammed by, several million people every week. But okay, so here we are. Now, the point is that if you want me to contact your parliament, you have to send me an Excel or open office document where the first column is the name of the person. Or if the email says the name, you don't even have to do that. You just have to put all the email addresses into one column, so vertically one over the other. And it has to be in the format of an Excel, so Microsoft Excel or open office document, okay, to make it easy for me to copy and paste this. So there we go. people have already sent me stuff, so I haven't completed everything yet. Okay, so there are some things still waiting in the backlog, but I've made a first attempt. Now, I also would like to ask you, if you send me stuff, don't send me just individual emails for each category. Try to complete categories. So if you send me stuff for the parliament, send me all the parliamentarians. If you don't send them all, please don't bother. Please wait until you have the entire email list completed, okay? Similarly, with the other categories, like government officials, you know, if you give me a list of government officials, there have to be at least 100 or at least 200 or something like that. So a sizable, you know, collection of them. Now, with the heads of the military and the MOD, typically you only have a few emails, so that's okay. With police forces, try to, you know, collect police forces so that you try to get the main police forces in your country and so on. With lawyers, because there are so many lawyers, if you send me, let's say you're in Poland, if you send me 200, the 200 biggest law firms in Warsaw, I would be happy. Okay, that's okay. But I need to have big lists, okay? So here in Switzerland, I have a lady who is just amazing. She got going, and you can just see how much we put together. So in Switzerland, we've now contacted the mainstream press, the parliament, the government officials, quite a few of them, the military, the intelligence agencies, the lawyers. I have, you know, an amazing list of lawyers for pretty much every canton, a lot of doctors, a lot of psychiatrists, and we're now on to things like neurologists, ophthalmologists, and so on. So she is really bombing along. So Switzerland is now really taken care of, but I would extremely appreciate if I got the parliaments for, say, Belgium, Finland, France, you know, the Bundestag I just haven't completed it yet, and so on. Okay, so please, guys, get going and see this as your chance, you know, to really inform your country and remove plausible deniability once and for all. Okay. Now, the other thing I'm informed is the UN people. Personally, I am not going to hold my breath for the UN people to get their arse into gear. Okay. This is just, I just put it in pro forma. So that, here, unfortunately, it dropped off. But I've got the Secretary General, the main human rights bodies, the Special Rapporteur for Torture. And these three entries were, hang on, I think it got dropped off. So there were another 3 UN, you know, bodies that were contacted. I just somehow disappeared. But anyway, for the EU, the members of the European Parliament, I still need help. So unless, you know, it's your people have been contacted, please send me a list. I've contacted the Estonian, the Finnish, the British and the Swedish members of the European Parliament, but I'm still looking for lists for the others. Okay, the EU commissioners have been contacted and some of their deputies. Okay, now further on, you will see the full date list on what exact date have I contacted whom. Okay, so here you have the details. For example, the House of Lords was contacted on the 29th of June. But because of this, okay, I have incurred just astounding retaliation, as you can imagine. So this is not too surprising, because back in 2017, when we had the Tsunami email campaign, okay, the amount of retaliation I got became so severe when we contacted Switzerland in the Swiss Parliament that I had to abort the entire Tsunami email campaign. This time, I'm not going to abort it. This time, it's the next phase, and we are just bombing along, okay? So now, let me go on. There's a huge lot of news I want to talk about, but I'm going to shift that into another broadcast that will probably come on Sunday. Okay, so tomorrow on Friday, I'll have Kevin Annett on, and he will talk about news about the genocide in Canada and the big tribunal that they're launching in September. There's some big news, so that will be tomorrow. And then on Sunday, I will do a news, you know, a newsreel and news commentary. But today, I really want to focus on the next phase. Okay, so the next phase now is to remove plausible deniability from all these government officials, and that is the precursor for the court cases. Okay, so I'm sending these emails not necessarily in the hope that I'll get an email back. Okay, when the guy from the Bundestag replied, I was just blown away. I was just thinking, oh my God, my emails actually arrived. That's really good to know. But I'm going to take that seriously. And he is the guy in charge of torture. And as a German citizen, I do have a right to be heard, right? When it's about the German genocide. So I'm going to take that as far as I can. And at this stage, I also would like to encourage all the German victims who speak English to start filling out the affidavit template. Okay, I need that data, guys, because without this, I can't actually refer to cases. The people who have hired me for consultancy and counseling, I cannot talk about their cases because of confidentiality. I can talk about them in the most abstract terms and saying things like, oh, well, you know, there are problems in Germany. And I know, for example, from journalists and, say, judges who I'm not allowed to name that, yes, they are victims, but I can't talk about things concretely. So if you want the German Bundestag as a German citizen to help you, you need to submit a case. Okay? So you either fill in the affidavit template now, because it's in English, so you have to be able to speak English, or you write, you know, a full stated affidavit in German in full sentences, not using the affidavit template. I'm sorry, I have not been able to translate it to German yet because of the attacks. You know, the type of attacks that dent my whiteboard and stuff like that. So anyway, so that's the next stage. So we do have people replying, okay, and I have this sort of whiff of an inclination that the German Bundestag knows very well how the Nuremberg sort of trials go. So I'm not too surprised that they are the first ones to pull away from the pack, okay? So they did a really smart thing. They're like, okay, we will start negotiations. So they are playing on time, right? But they started the process. That's good. That gets a like from me. Now, all the other parliaments, well, they better, you know, get into gear, because the next phase now is utterly serious. It's all about, you know, injunctions. It's all about legal liability. And it's about putting people into jail. And it's about going after people's personal money, because they have been benefiting from human trafficking and crimes against humanity. And if I get my way, it's also about executing people in the military who have been conducting this, you know? So that's the next phase. Now, what I wanted to say to you, hang on, was there something I wanted to mention? So I told you the notification. Oh, yes. So what I would ask you to do right now is you can look at the type of ceases and desists I sent. I am of the opinion that, you know, it's pretty clear what's going on. It's crimes against humanity. And, you know, these people have disregarded every single law in the book. Okay, so similarly, the victims are also entitled to disregard any sort of, you know, involved legal format. And we can just state that we asked them to cease and desist, and that in plain English should be good enough. Okay, if they ignore that, and I also think an email is enough. I think emails count these days as legal documents, you know, and in front of the judiciary. So an email is good enough, okay? Should they come back and say, oh, yeah, well, we got the email, but it wasn't a written letter, you know, stamped by the, you know, official postal system headquartered in Switzerland. That's the only thing we recognize for legal documents. And for this reason, we decided to continue to murder you. Well, I think then these guys fall right into the Nuremberg type of category where we can, you know, with a clean heart, execute them for being Nazis, okay? So for this reason, I strongly believe that an email is good enough. So I encourage you to send your cease and desist. You don't have to make it public. You don't have to notify me, that you do this. You can, of course, you can CC me in, and then it will go also into, you know, there will be a record in my inbox. But you don't need to do that. You can just privately send them a cease and desist, okay? You have the emails, you can look them up. I've published them now. So I encourage you all to do that now, okay? If you are in the US, you send your cease and desist to the US Space Command. If you're in Europe, you send it to the NATO Space Command. And if you want to, also to the US Space Command. And the reason behind this is that among them, okay, both of them have the ultimate command and control over all the satellite systems that fly over our heads, okay? So they are ultimately answerable for any sort of satellite gunning that might be going on. If you are unsure if it's now a satellite or if it's your neighbor or, you know, something other, a drone maybe, well, then you include, you know, a cease and desist to all of these, to the Space Command, the NATO Space Command. Here Switzerland is officially not NATO because unofficially they're the headquarters of NATO. So in my case, I sent them to the NATO Space Command. I sent it to the Swiss military and the Swiss Secret Service. So when it's, for example, a military weapon staged at a neighbor, that to me sounds more like the Secret Service doing it. If it were a drone, a militarized, you know, a military drone gunning me, that would be more the Swiss military. If it's a satellite, it's more like the Space Command, you know? So it's this kind of staggering. You don't have to get it exactly right. You can just send it to all of them and then take all of these fuckers straight into court. And then among them, they can decide who fired which shot, okay? Because if you're a victim, I guess you would be gunned by all of these, by all of the above. So, you know, what the hell? So this is now the next stage of this war, okay? Now, what I want to iterate is that you all please start filling out the victim affidavit, okay? Now, I think I've got roughly 20, you know, rounded 20, but I need many, many more. And there are some people still working, still finalizing theirs. I would encourage those to actually get, you know, going and finalize the affidavits and send it to me, because I'm going into court not that, you know, not that long off. Okay, now I would like to give you a bit of an overview, okay, because today is dedicated to the to this, what I call the next phase in the war. And I'm sorry, okay, I have to do a bit of a diversion for the experts here, right? Because I would like to get across my strategy, what I'm doing, and I would like to encourage some discussion, okay, among the experts and the people in the know about how exactly we should go, you know, about doing this. I think everybody has their own personal plan, and I just would like to put out there the plan I am following, which is, I call it the Icebreaker Strategy, okay? And I would like to explain my thinking behind it and how I'm positioning myself in the next phase, okay? So that internationally, everybody knows exactly what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, and, you know, what strategy I'm following, because I'm of the strong opinion that that is actually the healthiest thing, okay? And I encourage absolutely freaking everybody in the military, in the intelligence agencies, in parliament, to follow suit. And I would encourage everybody to move from what we had in the previous centuries, which is secrecy, to total transparency, because that is actually the system optimum. And I'll explain why, okay? Now, for those people who are listening, this will be a bit more technical, but I'll try to put it into plain English, so bear with me, okay? The reason why I put this whiteboard up is because I wanted to explain to everybody how a system works, okay? And when you're looking at complex human systems, they can be bewildering, okay? They can be highly complex. They can also be opaque, because of secrecy or because of size or because of misinformation or whatever. So when physicists are confronted with a complex system, we are breaking it down to the core laws of physics, okay? So then you can understand what's going on without necessarily having to know all the details. And this is worth gold when you're dealing with highly secretive systems or highly complex and vast systems like countries or economies or global crime cartels and stuff like that. Okay, so I will whittle it down to the core point, okay, in the simplest terms. And because it's all using laws of physics, we should all around the planet agree on these facts. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you are Russian intelligence or Chinese intelligence or American intelligence or I don't know what, the intelligence of Mars. We should all agree on this, okay, because it's the freaking laws of physics, right? So this is the value of it. Now, if you want to analyze the optimum in a system, okay, for a highly complex system, in physics, we already have the tools for it, and they come from thermodynamics, okay? Now, if you studied physics, you will meet this concept if you are studying, you know, engines, heat engines. So everything that I'm going to draw here is in the textbooks geared towards things like steam engines and stuff like that. But that shouldn't distract from the point that this applies to any system at all. It could be a star, it could be a pulsar, it could be, you know, a sun in a solar system, or it could be a world economy, or it could be a secret service. It could be freaking anything, okay? Because the laws of physics don't actually say, you know, what exactly the system is that you're dealing with. The only thing that the system needs to do, it has to be a system that does work of some type. It has some input and some output, and in the middle, it does some work. So in the simplest terms, okay, this is your system. It does some work, and there's some input and there's some output, and that's all you need for this, okay? So it could be a steam engine, right, where the input would be, I don't know, coal that the engine is then burning, generating steam and generating, I don't know, you know, motion forward in a steam train, for example. That would be the output, is the, you know, motion forward. So input is coal, the engine does something, and the output is you move heavy stuff forward. That's the output, right? But it could be other stuff. It could be coal in an economy. The economy does the work, and then the output is whatever you generate from the coal. Okay, could be that. It could be an intelligence agency. In comes data, okay, then the intelligence agency does some sort of analysis and puts out analysis reports, okay? Could be that. Or it could be something else, right? It could be anything. It could be a government, right? I don't know what governments actually do when you break it down, honestly, right? What the fuck is their input? I don't know. Voters putting them in, they do some stuff, and what do they generate? I don't know. Stuff, paper, okay, reports. So whatever, but it doesn't matter. That's the only system that you need, a system that does some type of work, and what type of work is of no importance. What goes in is of no importance. What comes out is of no importance, okay? Now, when you're dealing with steam engines, you have something, right, called a certain diagram where you are taking the temperature that of the engine, that's cycling it, and down here is a quantity that is called entropy. Okay, entropy. Now, if you're not in physics, you don't know what entropy is. It is basically the order in a system, okay? A highly ordered system has little entropy, and the chaotic system has high entropy. So if you like, the entropy is the mess in the system. But, you know, anyway, but aside from that, okay, aside from that, ignore, if you're not an expert, ignore the physical parameters, okay? Just accept that there are parameters here to do with the engine, okay? You can draw a diagram, and then you can draw the cycle that the engine does, okay? So a steam engine will do some sort of cycle, and as it's cycling around, right, for example, heating steam, okay, you burn the coal, you heat the steam, and then the steam evaporates, dries the engine, and then you repeat the cycle, okay? So there's some sort of cycle here. That's looks like that. And I think I managed to get the lamp perfectly in the middle, okay, by pure coincidence. Now, what you need to know is that any engine can run efficiently or inefficiently, okay? Goes without saying, right? You can have a car engine that is highly fuel efficient or not very fuel efficient at all. Now, in physics, we can calculate what is the most efficient you can possibly be with that engine, with that system that does work. And the absolute optimum that you cannot possibly improve upon is called the Carnot Cycle, okay? Carnot, French name. You can look it up on Wikipedia if you type in Carnot Cycle, okay? You will find all of this that I'm talking about. You can read up on entropy and temperature and what this thing is, okay? But now, that aside, right, let's just ignore the name. You know how it's spelled now. The point is that whatever your system, there is a cycle that is the absolute most efficient and that will get the most work out of that system. And it is physically impossible to improve on that, okay? What that means in terms of human systems is that there is indeed, whatever your system, economy, intelligence agency, world society, there is a way to get the most work out of the system. And once you have that type of cycle, you know, to get something done, there is the optimum that you can't possibly improve upon, and then there are deviations from that. Now, deviations in this sort of temperature entropy diagram for the physicists out there are when the cycle doesn't look like this, it kind of looks like, oh, we're wandering up over there, then down here, down there, and down there. You know, you kind of deviate from the whole thing, okay? It's not the optimum. And the absolute optimum is this, okay? Any deviation will just cause inefficiencies. Now, why am I banging on about this, okay? The reason why I bang on about this is because when you have 100% transparency around the world, you approach the Carnot cycle of your system, okay? It is physically impossible to improve upon that. Okay, and it looks like this, right? To explain it in more detail. Let's say, let's talk, I don't know, whatever we want to do. An economy, okay? So in an economy, price transparency is very important. If you are opaque about how much it actually costs to produce something, you know, and then you just generate a price, you might be screwing over your customers, okay? So you might be overcharging them stupidly. Like, for example, with a Ferrari or Maserati, that maybe costs you, I don't know what, something like 20,000 to produce, and you're selling that for, I don't know what, like 100,000. Now, if somebody came along and made a more efficient system, right? Because they don't need to pay their employees that much and blah, blah, blah. And then they can sell the same Ferrari or the same Maserati, not for 100,000, but 80,000, right? They are getting closer to this, right? We get a price optimum. Now, so it's kind of like the Carnot cycle in that example would be you are getting rid of waste, okay? So kind of, that would be approaching a very streamlined organization. You don't pay, you know, ludicrously high bonuses that you don't really need to pay because people would be doing the same amount of work with, you know, just, you know, less bonuses. So in every system, there's a sort of optimum. Now, I've really simplified matters with this car analogy, okay? Because it very much depends on what you want to maximize here. But what I'm trying to get at here is things like currency systems and also intelligence agencies, okay? Because this is our biggest problem, and things like militaries. If we think back of what the military used to be, the military used to be on paper for defense, okay? Now, if you want to defend, say, Europe, okay, and you build this big satellite directed energy weapon system. Okay, you put it up there, and then you wait, and nothing happens, but everybody is safe. Okay, there are no missiles being fired at us here in NATO because everybody knows we've got this. Say, let's assume this were a missile defense system. We have this missile defense system, so what's the point? Okay, so you've achieved your optimum with that amount of money. Everybody is safe, job done, and all these generals can, I don't know what they do when there's no war. They could do that, right? More of it, I don't know. Twiddle their thumbs. Now, that's the optimum, okay? Now, the system typically doesn't stay at the Carnot efficiency by itself. It will just go off somewhere into, you know, high inefficiency. In terms of the NATO generals, concretely, it would be like, well, these people built up a big fat, you know, satellite system, defense system, and then they think, okay, well, we have our income as generals. There is no war, so we go into the office every day and it's all, you know, a-okay, and we're just sitting there. How can we optimize our personal life and make more money? And then they suddenly think, oh, well, we could turn this directed energy weapon system inwards, and we could, for example, blackmail parliaments and extort money. And unless they pay us money, we will just, I don't know, burn up California, right? Or burn down the car park in Liverpool, you know, and stuff like that. And then it turns out that, oh, yeah, they can make a lot of money with that, so they will start doing that. And what happens when a system starts, you know, going away from being close to the optimum into here is that for one person, it looks like a huge, you know, step up in profits. Okay, these NATO generals would become ludicrously wealthy, right? Or whoever controls that system. But the system overall, the society overall, would end up with a big fat fucking inefficiency. And that's because, okay, you've got a couple of knobheads in NATO making a ludicrous amount of money, more than they could possibly use up in their lifetime. And then they start spending it on cocaine and hookers, say, right? Then they would spin it off into other business plans like trafficking children, say, just as a hypothesis. And before you know it, you have a bunch of warlords, right, killing the entire economy, right, killing the entire fucking population, right, which amazingly sounds pretty close to what we have now, right? So overall, the system started wandering off from the Carnot efficiency into, you know, big nirvana of inefficiency, right? So how can you get it the hell back as quickly as possible so that you have the highest number of people in the economy surviving, therefore the highest number of people actually working, generating stuff, you know, moving the economy forward like humans should be doing, right? Now, you can get from there back to here if you have, for example, transparency, right? Suddenly we all know, oh, okay, it's the, let's say, right, the NATO generals doing all this gunning, right? And then we all know we have transparency. We get a court case. We, if I get my way, right, we get these people hanged for high treason. And then we're all back to a happy economy where we're all safe and everything is fine, right? So we're moving back to here. Now, what you need to understand is overall, for one, I'm picking on the NATO generals, right? I could also put in the military or the Secret Service of Switzerland or the US or the UK. You get the idea, right? But when we started wandering away from the Carnot efficiency, the perfect optimum in the system overall, a few people suddenly became stupendously wealthy, but everybody else got massively screwed. Okay, because suddenly they started being murdered and started being given cancer through directed energy weapon gunning, right? So overall, the entire system started producing a lot less wealth. For one person or a few people, it was stupendous amount of wealth, but overall, it wasn't that much wealth. So you start generating a lot of people who are massively pissed off, massively unhappy, and before you know it, when you're out there there will be a massive reset back to the Carnot efficiency when these people bring you Nuremberg 2.0, hang all these fucking generals, and then we get back there. Okay? So the bottom line is when you have whatever system and you start moving away from the Carnot efficiency, eventually the benefit of having a reset will become so overwhelming that you will have a sudden big fat reset. Okay? Now, in the real world, a reset like that involves a lot of bloodshed, right? So it all ends in tears. And this is all just nonsense, okay? So throughout the 20th century, we had basically this happening, and it still continues to happen to this day. So if you're wondering about what the fuck to do in the 21st century so that we cut the crap and get back to the absolute most we can get out of all of our lives, I'm telling you guys, we need to get back to the Carnot efficiency, right? The Carnot cycle for our world. Now, the Carnot cycle is always the cycle where globally it is absolutely physically impossible to improve on that. That's what you have to remember, okay? The Carnot cycle, I say it again slowly, is the one where globally it is physically impossible to improve on it. It is physically impossible to get more work out of the system, more benefit. So for work, we benefit, okay? It is physically impossible to globally get more benefit out of the system, okay? That's all you need to know. So this is the background, guys, and from henceforth, I'll be referring to the Carnot cycle. If you don't know what the Carnot cycle is and want more details, please go to Wikipedia, and from then on, you know, follow the route to physics textbooks and so on. So this is the Carnot cycle, okay? Remember this. And remember, the Carnot cycle produces the most benefit for everybody. And it is physically impossible to improve on that. Okay? Now, what does this mean in terms of intelligence agencies, right? I can tell you that secrecy takes you away from the Carnot efficiency somewhere out into, you know, the far recesses of this diagram, where a couple of people benefit stupendously because they have access to all the secrets and everybody else gets fucked. Right? So eventually, when we start uncovering these secrets, we have a massive reset that will, as always, end in tears. And if I get my way, we'll get a lot of people executed. And then we're back to a happy life where, you know, we're all doing our best. And it is absolutely impossible for any nation on the planet to do better because we are at the optimum. Okay? So as a physicist, I'm going this way. I will be tracking this Carnot efficiency as closely as I can. Now, in a real system, you can never, ever be exactly on the Carnot cycle. That is just a theoretical limit. You're always somewhere, you know, outside, but you can try, you know, your best to be as close to the Carnot efficiency as you can possibly be. Okay, that's the goal, to be tracking the Carnot cycle in a complex human system as closely as you can be, right? That is the goal. Now, what has this to do with transparency? Okay, when you, in a human system, start moving away from the Carnot cycle, okay, one person or a group of people starts having an advantage over everybody else. The easiest advantage, as can be seen in insider trading, is to have information that nobody else has. Okay, suddenly those people have a huge advantage. Okay, at first it seems that that's a good thing. Let's say you're an intelligence agency, okay, and you want to spy on another nation who you termed the axis of evil or part of the axis of evil, and therefore you are spying, you're sitting there, you're keeping all your secrets to yourself, you're just spying over, you know, what they are doing. And you think this is brilliant for you because now you know their secrets, they don't know your secrets. Okay. If it were just one person and you would be a saint, that might, you know, be okay. But as a physicist, I know that for complex human system, that will end in tears. It will end in a huge you know, diversion away from the Carnot cycle, which will then end up in tears when it all, you know, bounces back again. Why is that? It's because if you build up a huge spying organization like the CIA or the NSA or Vatican Intel, and you and your group are the people who have all the secrets and you're spying on everybody else, like the all-seeing eye, right? You are the all-seeing eye, you see everything and nobody sees what you're doing. Well, in a complex human system, you start generating creative business plans, right? You suddenly start thinking, okay, well, at first we started off talking about our own security. Now we've guaranteed it because we know what everybody else is doing. So we can already, you know, guard against everything that they're doing against us, you know, ahead of time, so they will never win. Wahahaha, right? What do we do now? Are we just going to sit here in the Vatican and just, you know, look at our beautiful paintings and, you know, shag young boys? No, it's never going to stop there, right? Before long, a system like that will think, oh, well, we know all the secrets, none of them know, so we could just make a lot of money off trafficking, you know, humans, or selling drugs, or selling weapons, you know, and before you know it, whoa, you're out there, right? And then you think, oh, but we're not Vatican Intel. We're different, okay? We are totally different. We're the land of the free, you know, yada, yada, yada. And we will build up an intelligence agency. We call it the CIA or the NSA. And then we will collect all the secrets. We will be spying on those evil Italians with the Vatican and those evil Russians and the evil Chinese. We'll keep all the secrets to ourselves. We'll have all this big fat NSA. We will have all the data on everybody. Nobody else will. And that will be fine. And I'm saying, no, guys, that will hit you in the bollocks so hard, you won't even know what hit you, okay? Because it's the laws of fucking physics, okay? So, because you've moved away from the Carnot efficiency of perfect transparency. So, concretely, what's going to go wrong in your systems is that as soon as you have more than 100 people, you have statistically one psychopath. If you assume that the percentage of psychopaths is 1%, if you have 100 people, you've got one, right? A bit more, you're more guaranteed to have one, blah, 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 okay? So, right, if you've got 200 people, right, and so on. So you increase the number of psychopaths. Now, if you have the NSA with thousands and thousands of people, and thousands and thousands and thousands more, I can tell you that you have hundreds of psychopaths. Now, those hundreds of psychopaths are going to gang up on everybody, do a lot of backstabbing, and end up on the top. And, you know, before you know it, you will be an organized crime cartel of the most ruthless kind. And that, again, guys, is just the laws of systems physics. Okay? And that goes back to my video where I was talking about if you have a pyramid organization and you have these, you know, hierarchies, right? Every time there's a promotion, a little psychopath will outdo the competitor and end up, you know, getting the promotion. And bit by bit, these psychopaths will migrate up. And before you know it, the entire board is made up of freaking psychopaths and you've got deep capture. If you want to understand, you can look at my very early videos. This is what I started off with, my earliest videos, right, about systems analysis and the, you know, the laws of systems physics, right, for human complex organizations. Now, that's a given, okay? So this is the background. You all know that, I hope. So if we go back now, right, as soon as you have secrecy, right, you are going off there, right? As soon as you have an advantage of any type over somebody else, you're going off that way. Now, with advantage, it could also be a military advantage, okay? So we could also be talking here about this system globally being what's, you know, quaintly called the global security system, right? Which in real terms means the absolutely overpowering power of the fucking Nazi psychopaths running the US military, okay? And, you know, in the way I phrased it, you already know what I think about the outcome, right? And maybe you agree. What you have, if you have military dominance of one group of people, whereby the group of people comprises thousands and thousands and thousands of people, like the US military, that is again a pyramid organization. So we'll have psychopaths at the very top before long, and then that group of psychopaths is dominating absolutely everybody on the planet, right? So they went off, they are making huge profits, right? Like in Vietnam and Latin America, like pick frickin' any country of the world, right? Chances are that the US military, you know, put their cock in at some point in history, right? And are still there. For example, Germany, right? So the US military is still at Ramstein, which means that they have really they went off. They are now dominating the entire planet, right? And what's going to come next is the reset, and it's going to all end up in tears. And this ending up in tears, it's, I think, roundabout now, when it turns out that the US Space Command and, you know, the NATO Space Command, which is dominated by the US because it's a US general, right, at the very top, they have decided to start murdering everybody, like the Germans, the Swiss, the English, and even the Americans, believe it or not. Why is that, right? It's because these NATO generals and the US military, in their little, you know, psychopathic minds, have so went off. So this is all rising profits for them, that they absolutely fucked everybody else. Okay. Now, what will happen now is a big reset. And as always, if I get my way, people will get hanged for this, as they should be, right? It's a way to throw psychopaths out of the system, by the way. There's no way to stop a psychopath, absolutely no way, unless you jail them for life, which is expensive, or the cheapest thing is you really make sure that you get the right psychopath, you document their crimes, and then you execute them. That is actually the best thing to do. And people knew that throughout centuries, right? And we just recently forgotten. But anyway, so that is it, right? So this is where we're now. We are here. We are here where my whiteboard is being machine gunned by the Space Command, right? And these men are so psychopathic that for their, you know, instantaneous dick titillation, they are willing to destroy a scientist and destroy all of her companies that she would have started in the meantime, right? Now, this is a big fat fucking inefficiency, because up here, by now, these people have so much money, the only thing that they get out of shooting me in the head and destroying my life is maybe a wank. Okay, so for the price of a wank, you are destroying a woman's life. That's where we are now. If that's not an inefficiency, I don't know what is, right? Okay, but the key is to know how we got from here to there. And the only ingredients were secrecy or any form of advantage. It could be an advantage in the size of the population. It could be an advantage in the monetary volume or the wealth. It could be, you know, an advantage in terms of the strategic location, or it could be an advantage in the technology, right? Or it could be an advantage like the NSA with all the tap points around the world collecting everybody's data, right? Okay. So as soon as you've got that, you are moving away. You are moving away from this. You are not at the Carnot efficiency, which means somewhere in the system, there are such overwhelming inefficiencies, it takes your breath away. Okay. So the bottom line is, it is absolutely physically impossible to improve on the Carnot efficiency. Now, I am deeply amused as a physicist to know that this is the case, and then to see it play out in real life, and to watch people go on about all the details of just how inefficient it is, right? For example, at NSA, you have thin thread, which is the cheapest thing. It's very close to here because it keeps everybody's privacy. Okay, so very close, not quite here, but okay. And then you have this other, you know, screwed in the head mass surveillance system whereby the NSA has absolutely everybody's data, right? And every last little grunt can just log into the system and do love-int and human traffic their mother or their neighbor, or, you know, and it's just that little group working for GCHQ and NSA, right? And a couple of other associated agencies like FBI and all this sort of stuff, right? But over the entire world population, it's a very small clique. Now, these people have so many business plans at their fingertips, they would be absolute retards, right? Absolute freaking morons for not making use of at least some, right? At least some tiny, tiny personal benefit that they could get, right? So it starts with a small, small benefit, which is maybe like, oh, let's just check if my, you know, my girlfriend or my wife is cheating on me. Okay, but what you don't notice is that absolutely everybody, thousands and thousands and thousands of people working at NSA have the same idea, right? And then a fraction of them is not even that interested in their wife. It's more like another guy's wife, right? So they will do love-int on them. And then they suddenly realize, oh, that was fun. Why don't I check out the girl at the end of the street, right? And before you know it, there's a big fat business plan in human trafficking. And because at the top it's all psychopaths, well, these psychopathic business plans will spread like a wildfire, and then they'll think, oh, we can actually make a lot of money with it. And before you know it, the NSA is not tasked with national security anymore. The NSA is tasked with human trafficking because that is the most profitable thing to do. Okay? Where did it all come from? This development, right? These billions that these human traffickers spend on themselves, well, it came from secrecy and it came from advantage, right? That's how we got there. If these guys didn't have secrecy, if it were actually, you know, let's assume a world with perfect transparency and mass surveillance, okay? Now, just imagine, I'm not saying I'm advocating this. Let's just assume as a mental exercise. If we would have mass surveillance and 100% transparency, it would mean that everybody could log into the NSA database and get everybody else's emails, phone content, everything, right? Scary. Well, it means that the pervert at the end of the street would know exactly what you're saying to your boyfriend on the telephone, but in reverse, you could do the same, right? So before long, you end up in this sort of balance, okay? Because that guy could spy on you and you could spy on his, you know, spying on you and so on, because all of this would be done digitally. So in other words, he could spy on you, but then in turn, you could log in and check what sort of queries were done on the NSA database. And then you would find the pervert at the end of the street spying on you. So you could go to the police and say, look, this guy actually spied on stuff that is really none of his business. I know because there was complete equality and equality of mass surveillance here, right? So I spied on him spying on me. He's doing something illegal. I'm just protecting myself, so he goes to jail, right? So in a situation like that, with perfect transparency, you actually end up with a pretty comfortable optimum, right? You could every week log into the NSA database and check what sort of queries were done on your name or your phone calls and your Skype calls. And you could get a full list of the perverts and you could just, you know, just jail them all, right? Keep going. Just let them spy on you. But as soon as they spy, they go to jail, right? What would happen is you would, before long, with thousands and millions of people next to you doing the same thing, you would free the streets of Britain or the United States of all perverts. Wouldn't that be nice? They would all be in jail, and everybody who wasn't really interested in the, you know, sex life and the private life of their neighbors would be outside of jail and would live a happy life. Okay, now that's the Carnot cycle in practice. It works, right? Because there's no advantage and 100% transparency. Now, with this, you know exactly what we need in the world, right? If we want to cut the crap, right, we have to get rid of this secrecy, as hard as it is, right? Because imagine we would open the entire NSA database. And by the way, I'm not advocating that, because the NSA actually had no right to have our data to start with. They did a criminal act by harvesting it, right? Okay, so I'm not saying that. I'll say at the end what I really want to say. But imagine, right? Now let's assume our private data is what it should be, which is private, right? But let's assume we open the entirety of, say, military intelligence and the entirety of these surveillance systems on other countries. What it would look like in practice is, for example, we have an intelligence agency, is totally transparent, right? But it has totally transparent spy satellites, totally transparent, right? Telephone taps, which is what we have now, because as soon as you pick up a phone, you know you're making an entry in the NSA database. So these days we have actually perfectly transparent spying. The only thing that's missing is we don't have access to the database yet, right? But there we go. But now imagine you would have an intelligence agency perfectly transparent. Now, what it would look like, what it used to look like, is that they used to spy on another nation, like, I don't want to say the Russians or the Chinese here, because that's just smoke and mirrors again, because they're all under the same one world government and one world military and one world, secret service in reality. But let's say there's some, evil country, okay? So you have the country of the free spying on evil country, and you realize that evil country has a program to produce nuclear weapons. Now, what happens these days is that stays secret. Okay, it stays secret, and it's passed with secret memos to secret people who will then do secret things with that information, typically file it somewhere in a filing cabinet. Okay, and then they worry, oh, well, these people are producing nuclear weapons. Shall we go and sabotage them secretly? And then you end up with this huge, fucking mind-blowing super industry of secrecy, of secret codes and secret ciphers and secret agents with secret handshakes and secret fucking classification, things. And it's all so much bollocks. We went really far away here, right? Now, the alternative is that we have a surveillance agency, like, let's say, spy satellites or, telephone taps. And as soon as something untoward is happening, this intelligence agency makes it totally public. It makes it absolutely mind-numbingly public, in that they will just publish it on YouTube or on their website and on Twitter, or all three. And they'll say, oh, we've just spotted at 10 a.m. today that, evil country launched a nuclear program, right, at these GPS coordinates. That's their lab, that's their supply chain, that's this, that, right? The entire fucking thing. What would happen? Well, suddenly, instead of just a few people doing their secret shenanigans, you suddenly have 9 billion people going like, oh, that's really shit, isn't it? It's like, do we really need that? Like nuclear weapons and all that sort of stuff? So you could start having the entire world population take action, instead of just a couple of people in secret doing secret things nobody knows about, right? And then suddenly, when a country starts doing bullshit, right, it would start doing bullshit, you'd make it immediately absolutely public, and you would bounce back to here. You wouldn't have to go all the way to here for us to discover, after 2,000 years, all about Vatican intel and their human trafficking and their ritual sacrifice and all the shit, and then have one big massive Pizzagate, Pedogate, Neurogate reset. We could just have little resets all the time, and we would just bounce back here all the freaking time, right? So much better. And then bouncing back into sanity would be just something that you do on, on an average day. Somebody does nonsense, and then world society corrects it and says, Actually, you know what? We don't need any more biowarfare agents. We don't need an even more creative way killing each other. Frankly, all of us, we just want our children to have a good education. We would want to have some decent healthcare, and all of us would rather not be in a war. So how about you psychopaths stop producing biowarfare agents and we can all get back and be all happy? Okay? That's when it works. 100% transparency works. As soon as you have secrecy, you have advantage. You will fuck yourself so hard you won't know what hit you. Right? That's how it works. And you can either work for an intelligence agency where you have classification on top of classification and classification, or you could be just a physicist and realize, actually, that's a really stupid thing to do, and work in transparent things like public research, which is what I was in. So there, right, as soon as there's any big surprises, right, and we did have them, right? So I know that people say, oh, CERN, this and that, but the bit that I was on is 100% transparent. The data is accessible to all the particle physicists. All the publications are transparent and downloadable, even for free, actually, because we put it on the free web. And we don't have what medical journals have, which is these ludicrously expensive things. So when we didn't like something that somebody else did with their analysis and we thought it was nonsense, because it was all transparent, it bounced back and produced good results, right? And at CERN, we have thousands of people working on an experiment like CMS, right? CMS and Atlas, those are the biggest experiments, but they are 100% transparent within the experiment, right? That's actually true. If you're a particle physicist, it is 100% transparent. And you have the right to look into every single analysis that's being published because your name will appear on the paper, because you all work together to make that paper. So that is an example of a very efficient, for all its faults, I realize it was actually a super efficient system. And everything that I've seen away from that, for example, medical physics, is very secretive. And that's why it's producing so much bullshit, because there's no correction. So there can be decades from going from here all the way to there before there's a reset. Okay? So that's what you need to understand. Now, what I want to say to you is that what I'm going to do in everything that I'm doing, I'm going to be following the Carnot Cycle as close as I can, right? Following the Carnot Cycle in my case is telling absolutely everybody all the time exactly what I'm going to do to shut these crimes down. There's no secrecy, no secret messages, no secret plans. Absolutely every intelligence agency in the world will know exactly what I'm doing. And therefore, there is no fucking way to improve on this. Okay? If anybody doesn't like it and has a better idea, well, they can go off as soon as I start going off on a tangent that people don't like. Well, they can continue and do something better. And then I'll realize, I'm like, oh, God, that's better. So let's get back to here, right? And then you cycle. So this is what I'm going to do. And for this reason, I am always, always, always going to stay in 100% transparency, right? 100% publicity. Now, when you have some sort of investigation that you want to keep secret because you are scared of, if people find out what you're doing, then you might get killed. At first, it appears that secrecy benefits you. But when you're dealing with a global system that knows everything that you're doing, because it is, spying on absolutely everything, has broken all the encryption and so on, what will happen when you start walking off in this direction is that the bigger system will reset you itself to its own personal carnal cycle. What it will mean concretely is that they will kill people. Okay? So in other words, if you are walking off in secrecy and you have some sort of secret investigation that you don't make public to the entire world from the get-go, the system, the bigger system, has a huge advantage killing you all off. It is actually the way it can reset itself to its own Carnot cycle. And because it's a big global system that has been with us for thousands of years, it is the biggest player. It is basically what sets the work. That's the driving engine in the system. So the driving engine will want to reset itself to its own Carnot efficiency, which might be human trafficking and drug running and weapon sales in that case. But because it's the dominant system, it can. Now, for what it will mean in your case is that you are going off in secret and you will see your collaborators being killed off one after the other. But because you were doing this in secret, you can't go public and you don't have the biggest system, which is the 9 billion people, or 7 billion. I'll keep forgetting how many people we are. It just increases so fast. I don't know how many billion people, but you suddenly can't appeal to them for help. Because then you would have to say, oh yeah, we had the secret investigation and these guys were working with us in secret and then they were secretly murdered. Well, that's after the fact. These people have already died. Okay? And that's exactly what I saw when I saw all these banker deaths. Okay? Because when I looked into how many people died, how many bankers died, what I noticed is that there were a lot of CTOs. So chief technical officers. Now, they are exactly the kind of people you would want to contact if you want to get access to the database of the bank because you're running a criminal investigation. But if you are requesting those databases in secret, the big system has a huge incentive to kill the CTOs, guys, because that is the quickest way for it to reset to its own Carnot efficiency. And lo and behold, that's what happened. These bankers were just flying out the windows like, you know, in one every time you blinked. Exactly, because from the physics point of view, that's what makes sense. Now, the alternative is to say, just quite simply and 100% transparently, well, it seems to be that HSBC is a transnational criminal organization. And from this point onwards, from this pronouncement onwards, which will be public and broadcast everywhere, we will request this HSBC databases, all their databases now publicly over here to these investigators to have a look at. If any of those investigators then die, well, you know who did it. It was HSBC or their criminal, you know, masterminds behind it. So you have a lot more than what you did is you're not stuck to this system here, which is the dominant system being the cartel. So let's say this system is the cartel. Okay. If you have transparency, you suddenly move to the bigger system, which is the world. And then you're looking at the efficiency of the world, right? And suddenly it doesn't matter what the little cartel does in here, because there are millions of people out there watching, and they will want to have a Carnot efficiency. And what they will do is they will reset the cartel back to the world Carnot cycle. Okay? That is the absolute fucking key, guys. And I'm saying this because looking out into the world, I can see a fuckload of secrecy among the white hats. And I'm just saying, guys, if you keep doing your secrecy shenanigans, you will get yourself killed. And this is not me threatening you. I'm just trying to get across to you that you are doing it in the most fucked in the head way. Okay? And for this reason, because I for sure don't have access to any sort of external protection, right? The only protection I have is the world, and the world recognizing that whatever I'm doing is tracking the world Carnot cycle so closely that they better fall in line with me, because I am basically trying to be the standard candle showing you what it means to be exactly as close to efficient as you can be. If you divert an inch from me, you will screw yourself before long. That's what I'm basically trying to do. So this is the only way, as a physicist, how you can actually play this game and ensure that actually, if anybody kills me, they just killed the standard candle, they killed the communication element that keeps the entire system, you know, those people would need my explanation to be on the same page. Well, if you kill me, you will just divert the system away from the Carnot cycle, from the world Carnot cycle, because there will be fewer people, you know, my viewers who get the information from me, well, they will not be on the same page, right? And for this reason, they will pull off in another direction, not really according to your benefit, and then you will end up with this back and forth again. Okay, so I'm not saying that, you know, the world leaders listen to me. Oh, no, 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 no. I'm just saying that I for sure will always stick with transparency and be following the Carnot cycle. Now, if you are a bigger system, let's say the NSA or the FBI or MI5 or GCHQ or the German economy or whatever, believe it or not, actually sticking to transparency, 100% transparency is the best way to operate. You will end up in the perfect optimum. Okay. And if you keep doing that, and if you show others how optimal this optimum actually is, other people will fall in line with you, and you will all start tracking this, because you will all realize that is actually for everybody the best way, and it is physically impossible to improve on it long term. So in other words, any deviation from the Carnal cycle are short-term benefit to a few people who will then have their head lobbed off before long. Okay, that's it basically. So if you want to, you know, live your life happily until the end with your head stuck firmly on your neck, you stick to the Carnal cycle. And this is also true of global militaries. Okay. So the most efficient is actually peace, believe it or not. A war will create a huge benefit to the victors, but will screw the people who get defeated. So it does a huge damage to the economy, to that part of the world, yada, yada, yada. We all know that, right? But in terms of physics, there's a way to actually explain that for real. Now, I really ask everybody who can get their head around the physics, right, to start thinking along those terms, right, along those lines. What is the Carnot efficiency, and how can we be tracking it closer and closer, and how can we get more and more transparency into the system? Okay, because if we want to really get back as quickly as possible, we have to be on this line by yesterday. Okay, yeah. So I've seen a lot of really good things that actually do what the next phase of this thing should be doing. For example, if there are investigations and the results of the investigation are published immediately so that the entire world benefits from the outcome of the investigation, that's a really good thing, because suddenly, you know, we can all start going against these criminals and start correcting the system. Okay, to give you a concrete example of this, you know, so that it's not just all abstract and whiteboard, you know, physics talk for you. Let me give you an exact concrete example. Okay, hang on. Before I do so, let me check. Whiteboard. Okay, you guys can still hear me. That's good to know. So, and a concrete example of a very good way of putting this into practice is actually the newest investigations of the American intelligence media. So over here, right, I am really impressed by the investigations of this guy called Michael Mckibben, and the fact that he made everything public. So on the American intelligence media YouTube channel, okay, I really encourage you to just watch everything, binge watch it if you must, everything that has Mckibben in, okay? So I haven't even seen the newer ones, which is the British Black Chamber, the British called Trump the enemy, but there's lots of good stuff about the Five Eyes, here about the social media and how the social media is a big fraud. Okay, here the stuff about the Clintons and Google and Facebook, and the one that's most useful to me is the one about the Five Eyes. Hang on, where's that? I've shown that one before. This one here, blinding the Five Eyes Hydra. Very good. Now, the reason why this is exactly tracking the Carnot efficiency is because behind this is a big investigation and the, going through historical documents and finding out something that I've been saying all along from the very beginning, which is that the entirety of of American intelligence is being controlled by the British. Okay. Now, for me, thinking in terms of systems, that was like a no-brainer. And the next no-brainer is that British intelligence is controlled by Vatican intelligence, which is headquartered here in Switzerland. But people haven't actually got to that stage yet. The only person that got there is Jean Ross, right? My teacher, really, my tutor who opened my eyes. But not many people have tracked it, okay? And I think that's because the jump from British intelligence to Vatican intel here in Switzerland is actually quite an opaque one, okay? So you have to be a bit more, cunning about this. But I've got a lot of circumstantial evidence that I can give people that this is really how it is. But anyway, it's already good, right? It's already good that the Americans figured out that actually they are still being owned by the British Crown, right? And then the next step is to realize that the crown is actually not just the royal household, it's the crown corporation, which is the Vatican, and no. Okay. But anyway, so they got that far, that they have now tracked it to British intel. But what's really good is that when they did that, they looked at the historical documents and they immediately made it public. Okay. This is worth gold because then I can immediately take it on this side of the pond. And here I am. And I'm like, oh, as it happens, I'm just about to sue British intelligence again. So what I can do is I can use that information. And I actually emailed Michael Mckibben, and I've emailed the American intelligence media, and I'm trying to get that information into my court case because as soon as I have it, I can now start going up against these criminals. Okay, I can suddenly start quoting all the cases to do with American intelligence and all the people being tortured with chip implants, with directed energy weapons and so on by American intelligence, knowing full well that they are exactly the same people who are controlling MI6 and MI5 who are torturing me. So suddenly we have this collection of forces and we can all move forward. Now, this is important because when Michael Mckibben set out with this investigation, at no point would he have thought, oh, I'm going to do this so that Dr. Katherine Horton in Switzerland can, use some information to sue MI6. No, it would have never occurred to him, but that's the upshot. Okay, which, who knows, might turn out to be hugely beneficial in the long term. Okay, so you have this huge amplification effect because you went outside the US, you made it public on YouTube. I managed to see it in Europe. So you went from the system of the US, so the US people investigating the criminals, right? And the criminals in intel doing the investigation, you expanded it to the world, and suddenly, oh, across the pond, there are people who have exactly the same interests as you, which is to track down these criminals and shut them down. Right? So you have an amplification of forces for free. So suddenly the entire system became a lot more efficient. For the price of the investigation that Michael Mckibben did, right, he will get more bang for his buck, basically, because now I will use his information and I too will go after British intelligence, right? So that's the sort of stuff that I'm talking about, okay? So really, the 21st century model for intelligence is 100% transparent. Now, to the old guard that grew up with secrecy, it will be extremely hard to see this because they grew up in the mindset of, oh, it's us against the Russians and us against the Chinese. But I'm sorry, these days we know it's all bollocks. The crime cartel has taken over China in the times of Mao. That's why there was the Chinese genocide. It was never in the interest of the Chinese to start murdering their own people. The reason why the Chinese murdered their own people is because they were controlled by a foreign system. And for that foreign system, it was really in their interest to kill off a bunch of, a couple of millions of Chinese and then have the one-child policy to reduce the Chinese population and make them more controllable, right? And I can tell you the people who are introducing the social score in China right now are exactly the same people who orchestrated the Chinese genocide, because both are to control the Chinese population. It is not to unleash the Chinese for creativity, right? Unfortunately, it isn't. So it's exactly the same people. Now, if you trace any of those, either, you know, who controlled Mao, I know they use Chinese people. They always use a front of local people, right? In Russia, they used Russians for the Russian genocide. They use Stalin. In China, they use Mao, right? You always have a local front, but that is just to distract from the reality that actually behind the scenes, it's being controlled by a foreign power that is neither Chinese nor Russian. Okay, as soon as you have an entity, or sorry, as soon as you have a nation killing its own, that is the ultimate proof that it's being controlled by a foreign entity. That's just how it is. Okay, so anyway, so now the 21st century model is to not be like, oh yeah, America first or Germany first and all this sort of stuff and keep it all to ourselves. No, right? The 21st century model is we are all doing it together and we are cycling to the world system, okay, of full transparency. And we have to do it because the globalists are already global. Okay, so for us to end up bigger than them, we have to be global. We have to be working together globally. So it's not a question of America first, or Switzerland first, or Russia first, or China first. That is bollocks. That's again trying to get an advantage over other people, which will end up in tears. No, the Carnot Cycle is we are all solving all of our problems together at the same freaking time. And the only distinction, it's not, there's no distinction between white and black and Chinese and Russian and American and German. All these labels are completely superfluous. The only label that matters is, are you inside of the cartel or are you outside of the cartel? Are you inside organized crime or are you outside organized crime being harmed by organized crime? That is the only thing. And that's because organized crime is an inefficiency. It is not fair. It is not following the rule of law. It is moving away, producing a huge benefit for some people while screwing a very large number of other people. So at some point, for the many, many other people, it will pay to reset the system to fairness. Okay, so it is for this reason that all of these, like the rule of law, is following the Carnot Cycle, right? A fair economy is following the Carnot Cycle. Fairness, equilibrium, transparency, and justice are all such that they are exactly at the perfect equilibrium. If you would have perfect justice in the system, we would have perfect efficiency, because if anybody tries to screw other people over by cheating, if we had perfect justice, there would be an immediate reset. Okay, if you have corrupt judges, what you're doing is those corrupt judges will be producing a profit to some litigants while screwing others. Now, a corrupt judge will think, oh, I've made so much money out of being corrupt. Nobody noticed because nobody comes as a court observer to my court cases, right? So I can get away with it. So I'll do it again and again. And then before you know it, you have Switzerland. Sorry, insider joke. But you have basically a hugely corrupt system where all the judges are crooks and stupendously rich, right? But in the process, you have screwed so many people that before you know it, there will be a little revolution. And if I had my way, you know what would happen, which will not happen here. But you would end up with a lot of judges in jail. And suddenly all that wealth the corrupt judge has built up will hit a brick wall when suddenly he's being corrupt in a court case for crimes against humanity, where suddenly there's a Nuremberg mechanism to acid strip the bastard and ideally also kill him. Big black swan event, isn't it? Being killed for being corrupt in court, one time too often. But that's the type of black swans we're talking about now. So do you understand? If you don't have corrupt judges, if actually the judges do their absolute best and there's just no way to improve on it because they have followed the law, and not just the law, by the way, they have followed justice. Well, if suddenly billions of people, would look at that court case, they'll be like, yeah, well, that guy did his best, right? I mean, what do you want? Any deviation from his judgment would produce unfairness, therefore would produce, a small deviation away from the optimal. That's how it works, right? Now, where we are now here, okay? We are now here in the intelligence agencies, like up there, which in real terms is things like, the head of the FBI is shagging children and is human trafficking children and apparently is shagging British royalty, and you just can't make this shit up, right? And the rest of the people are human trafficking the population by human medically trafficking them through their implants. So a couple of intelligence people who have access to Lockheed Martin software controlling the body implants of the rest of the Americans in the world population have a hell of a time, right? Can rape any man, woman, and child on the planet, through their remote control, and have just, happy time, but everybody else gets screwed. So when we at this stage, all that is required is for people like me to say, hey guys, just take an ultraviolet torch, right, for $10, shine it in your eyes, and if your eye, your pupil is reflecting fluorescent green, you've just been fucked by criminals. So why don't all of us with eye implants get together, have a big fat court case, and then asset strip these motherfuckers legally, right? Using the perfect, just legal system, and bring them back to here. In other words, we will take house and wealth of all the FBI, heads of the FBI, that are alive these days. We will take all their money and use it to pay off the victims. Multi-million-pound damages on the way down here, and the heads of the FBI and NSA and everybody else who was involved in the remote neural monitoring program, ending up with nothing and maybe not even their life at the end of this, right? So that's where we are now. But we got from here to there through the secrecy, through classification. So classification is a big fat inefficiency, okay? Now, I am emphasizing this because as we're tidying up the intelligence agencies, the old guard will try to hang on to the stuff that they have known throughout their, entire careers. And they'll think, oh, yeah, well, we need some sort of NSA and we need some sort of CIA, but it just has to be whittled down and we just need a little bit of secrecy. And then I'm like, no, have you not learned? Right? I mean, we've just fallen flat on our faces as society. We should learn from our mistakes. The last thing that we want in an intelligence agency is secrecy, not even a little bit. Because as soon as you have a little bit of secrecy, what it means is that there's an insider clique of intelligence agencies, and then there's a question of who selects them. How do you end up to be part of that club? Which will then end up with more information than anybody else, and suddenly we'll have access to novel, fancy business plans, screwing us all over. And this will immediately be the case as soon as you have secrecy. So the only way to run an intelligence agency is to have it 100% transparent. In other words, an intelligence agency has to be a fully public, super loud siren. And as soon as there's anything untoward that might threaten the nation, that siren goes off and tells everybody what the matter is, so that suddenly 327 million Americans can start thinking about what the hell to do about it. Okay? And when you have millions of people, their networks, through the fact that we're all connected through social media like Facebook by just 3.5 degrees of freedom, when you have, 3.5 degrees of separation, When you have millions of people access to the same amount of information that might be threatening to that security, you have suddenly millions of people working on a problem. Before that, you're just a couple of thousand people in NSA or the CIA working on that problem, right? But anyway, I want you to have this little square in your mind and understand that the square stands for the Carnot Cycle. And please understand that the Carnot Cycle is not just something you use for steam engines. The Carnot Cycle is a universal principle of physics that is applicable to any system that does work of any kind. And doing work in physics terms means you get energy out of the system, which in an economy means profit. You get some sort of profit, or in human systems, some sort of benefit out of the system. So any system that produces any type of benefit, a financial system, an economy, a government, a social system, anything that we know, a judicial system, right? Any system that does work and produces benefit of some type will have a Carnot cycle. If you diverge away from the Carnot cycle, it will end up in tears. In the short term, it will feel to some people like that system is producing suddenly huge profits, but actually those profits are a detriment somewhere else. And before long, the profit detriment thing, the balances will tilt, and the detriment will be so large that it will suddenly pay off for huge people to gang up on others and reset the system. When you have the Carnot cycle, every single person gets the maximum benefit out of it, and they all collectively know is that it is physically impossible to get more profit out of it. So collectively, there is no benefit in ganging up on others. There's always a short-term benefit, but not a long-term benefit. So for this reason, when we're thinking about setting up an intelligence agency for the long term, or when you're thinking about a country for the long term, you have to think about the Carnot cycle for that system. And because a country is, a little system inside the world system, the most efficient thing for a country is actually to track the Carnot cycle of the world. Okay, now that might seem very hard, but actually there were mechanisms put in place centuries ago that pretty much did that. Okay, for example, talk about inflation. People have figured out that for centuries there was no inflation. And the reason why there was no inflation is because the financial system had a mechanism whereby it tracked the world Carnot cycle. And that was because the entire world was on a gold and silver standard. Everybody was using the same currency, so all around the world, prices were measured against exactly the same stuff equally. Everybody had the same type of gold and silver, the same quantities were, the same unit and so on. So you had a super efficient global system, and nobody could screw anybody else. What happened? We had the central banking system come in, take away people's gold like they did in the US, right? There was gold confiscation. And then what the central banks, this criminal cartel known as the central banks, did is that they reissued national currencies, which were different. So in Italy, you've got green paper, in Germany, you've got blue paper, and we are running around with different little paper things that are of absolutely no value. And suddenly the bank could move away from the Carnot efficiency by generating huge profits for itself, by having all the information, controlling all the banks, and therefore controlling all the currency prices. Okay, and suddenly the banking system started, as it moved away from the global system of gold and silver, suddenly the little banking system generated huge profits and started buying up the entire world through this game, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to reset the banking system back to the Carnot cycle. And if you understand the physics of the system, it's pretty clear what we need to do. We need to go back not to Bitcoin, but to gold and silver. Why not Bitcoin? Well, if you have listened for the last, hour or how long it has been, I can tell you why. It's because as soon as you have Bitcoin, you will have one set of computer programmers knowing exactly how Bitcoin works, knowing exactly the computer architecture, knowing the database format, knowing the encryption, knowing everything about it. Well, billions of people will have no freaking clue because they can barely use a computer, right? So suddenly you have advantage. As soon as you have advantage, you start moving away from the Carnot cycle, okay? In real terms, I can tell you exactly what that will look like. It will look like the NSA hacking the Bitcoin system. Only few people will know, will understand. Those few people are very easy to A, bribe, B, kill off, or C, threaten and intimidate. And then before long, your entire Bitcoin system will be just bullshit. And you will have a few insiders knowing exactly that it's bullshit, knowing exactly how it's bullshit and making huge profits out of it. And the billions of people around the world who maybe would also be using Bitcoin would have no freaking clue because they don't understand the database format. They don't understand computer architecture, and maybe they don't understand timing, and they will not understand how over the internet you can actually, cheat and do some high frequency trading type of shenanigans with Bitcoin. So it will be huge profits for a few people until the rest of the world cottons onto them, and then there will be a big reset ending in tears. Now, what you need to know is that through the internet, the reset will happen faster and faster and faster. Profits will accrue faster as well, but it will also end up in tears faster, okay? Because the internet is a big leveling thing. Suddenly you can reach every single person around the world pretty much at the speed of light, which means that if you start pulling some crooked schemes, before long there will be a reset, So for this reason, all you need to know, if you want to understand if a system is following it's the best it can be, is all you need to think, is it following the Carnot cycle or is it not? It is following the Carnot cycle when none of the participants in that system, nobody affected by that system in any way, has any advantage over anybody else. Then that system is the most efficient it can be. That's all you need to know. If you have secrecy, that's an advantage to some people. Therefore, it's not the Carnot cycle. Therefore, that system will end up in tears. Okay, so as we're moving now to the new phase, how am I tracking the Carnot cycle? Well, the Carnot cycle is things like the email campaign, the Tsunami email campaign. Suddenly, all those, hundreds of parliamentarians in the UK, the House of Commons and the House of Lords and the Swiss Parliament and the Bundestag and the Swedish Parliament, and all of these decision makers have the same information, which is that people are being murdered in their country with directed energy weapons. And before long, they will know that, a large fraction of their people are implanted. They will know about the ultraviolet torch, and they will find out that actually they too have an eye implant and that they too have been screwed by the people who had secrecy and an advantage. Okay? So by introducing that transparency, I'm moving now towards the Carnot cycle. And it is for this reason that I encourage you to please send me the contact details of all the parliamentarians. If I could, I would inform the Chinese parliament or the Russian parliament. I really don't care. I know exactly what to do. All I need to do is I need to get out the information to as many people as possible, because through that, I introduce transparency. Okay? And as soon as we have transparency, we start moving back to the Carnot cycle, and something very similar to what Michael Mckibben is going to experience will happen to me, which is that my information will suddenly open the eyes of people I didn't even know existed, right? It could be maybe a parliamentarian somewhere in Sweden, or it could be the IT manager of the parliament in Sweden, or it could be somebody who got this information when a Swedish parliamentarian sent it around. Who knows? But whoever that person is, who I don't know yet, will take action that's in their power to reset the system, right? It could be the husband of a parliamentarian, right? Let's assume a Swedish parliamentarian gets my email and she says to her husband, well, this is a really worrying email. I don't really know what to make of it. Her husband says over dinner, show me the email, reads it, reads a bit more because he's curious, reads all the stuff about the eye implants and goes, I had some vivid dreams. Why don't I just go and buy a 10 Swedish krona, I don't know how many Swedish kronas that would be, 500, UV torch. And then he realizes, shit, I'm implanted. And then he thinks, oh, hang on. I remember this YouTube video where Dr. Katherine Horton says that the high-risk professions where pretty much everybody by now should be implanted are things like politicians and their family members. And I am the family member of a politician. So shit, I ended up being implanted by the Swedish branch of the cartel. Hang on a second, that's not really what I signed up for when I married this woman, right? And that's also not what she signed up for when she became a member of the Swedish parliament, right? Being implanted in our eyes by the Swedish Secret Service was not even in the small print. So what the flying fuck, right? And then he might think, well, actually, she's a politician. I'm a very rich businessman. I think I will take this to court. And before I know it, there's a Swedish court case that's suddenly taking the Swedish Secret Service to court, and so on, right? So these are all the cases that can happen. And there's things that can happen when you introduce transparency, stuff that you can't even predict. But I don't need to predict it. So in other words, when this diagram was devised for steam engines, you didn't have to know what every single droplet in the steam engine is going to do in detail. All you needed to know that overall, if your steam engine was made in a way that it tracked the Carnot Cycle, you got the most out of your coal. If there were any inefficiency like friction in one of the pistons, well, the friction would dissipate some of the energy, so you wouldn't get the most, movement forward from your coal that you were burning, and so on, right? So this is the next phase. The next phase is to go from our old steam engine type of systems to the modern systems that we have in the 20th century, but to use the physics and everything we know from physics to benefit our decision-making in the 21st century. Okay, so for this reason, and I hope I made it very clear, I will never, ever, ever, ever sign a secrecy agreement ever in my life. Ever. Right? Because I know that as soon as I did something like that, I would just start moving away from this. So all my life, I was in public research. Everything I did was public. Had anybody bothered to interview me about my work back in academia, I would have told them everything. I could have showed them everything. And in fact, I considered it my duty to show everything to anybody who was interested because I was being paid out of taxpayers' money. Right? Actually, in the end, as a researcher, I was paid by St. John's College out of donations, so it's a different pool of people, but you get the idea. Now, when you have an intelligence agency being paid out of public funds, what it means is that every national of that country should have direct access to all the information that the intelligence agency has produced without asking. That's full transparency. And then transparency hits the boundary when it's about the protection of individuals, okay? So, but that has already been figured out by law. So transparency applies to big things like government offices, the military, secret services, weapons programs, right? These are big things that affect us all. They should be 100% transparent. The stuff that doesn't affect us all are things like, what did I have for lunch? Or who are my sexual partners? Or what's my sexual orientation? Or what's my children's names? Or where do my children go to school? That's nobody else's business, right? That should be private because it doesn't affect the nation, right? And that's the distinction. But when it's about DARPA, well, fuck me, that affects us all around the world. So when DARPA is talking about, you know, new brain tech, and Elon Musk is talking about a company producing neural lace, it should be, it's a company, it should be entirely in the public's eye, right? Both DARPA and, you know, whatever, you know, Neuralink or whatever Elon Musk's new company producing neural lace is called, right? They should both be 100% transparent. Now, you probably agree with me on, you know, Elon Musk's venture, but the thing about DARPA is that it's also a private for-profit company. So why shouldn't it be public? NSA, it's a private for-profit company, as I learned from Karen Melton-Stewart. Why is the NSA database not accessible to me? In fact, it would be tracking the Carnot Cycle if it were, because then I could look up exactly who ordered that fraudulent microwave in my name and had them sent to my address so that the invoice arrived with me, and I could take them to court. I could find out who all my gang stalkers are. I could find out who exactly is shooting at me with directed energy weapons, right? And all that sort of stuff. I could find out exactly who was human trafficking me and who is now shooting at me right now in my heart as I'm giving this presentation. I could do the entire mapping. So as soon as we would have 100% transparency, we could have these sort of things, okay? There we are. So this is what I wanted to say. That is the next phase. And everything I'm doing is following the Carnot Cycle. It's all about transparency. So emailing all these parliaments, being 100% transparent about the attacks that I'm suffering, okay? Being 100% transparent about what I'm going to do next. The next step is for me to go into court, right? But as I'm going into court, I will be again 100% transparent and make everything public apart from the few things that affect only me. So my personal data, my family's data and stuff like that, my health data, right? That is really just private. And that's the philosophy that I'm following. However, the crimes of MI5 and MI6 and GCHQ and all the other intelligence agencies, that's not private. That affects us all. And for this reason, it has to be 100% transparent. So a secret court like the Investigatory Powers Tribunal that has the right to remove the public and discuss the crimes of MI5 in secret is moving away from the Carnot Cycle, ergo it's bullshit. Right? That's why we need fully transparent courts, because only the fully transparent courts will be following the Carnot efficiency. Okay? So I hope you understand. I hope this was not too confusing. Just take this thing on trust for now. And if you want to find out more about the Carnot Cycle, it's in all the physics books for thermodynamics. And you can also find it in Wikipedia. And you will find lots of information about that online. Okay, thank you very much for listening. And on Sunday, I'll be back with a lot more hands-on news and a lot more direct commentary. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I could help some people. I hope, you know, if you disagree, there was no chat, by the way, because I didn't want any distraction from this presentation. If you've got any comments, you can still comment below. And I will appreciate any sort of commentary. That's always welcome. So thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.